Thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Let's see, I have two desktops going on here. Let's see. Okay, can you see the title slide? Just want to make sure.
You bet.
Okay, great, excellent. So thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to discuss this because today's topic, because this is a project that I was working on back in let's see, 2015 to 2016 when I was working at Princeton University. So a little bit more about myself. I graduated from Princeton University, as was mentioned. I worked in Thailand for a year, and then I was very fortunate to come back and work in the Office of Sustainability. And although my background was mostly biologically focused in the natural sciences, I was able to incorporate a lot of the social sciences into my work and get into environmental studies. So I was very fortunate to be hired as a campus as lab fellow. And that what's interesting about that is that when I first got to Princeton to work in the Office of Sustainability, we didn't really know what a campus as lab fellow was. Well, what we just knew that we needed to start something with campus as lab. So I was very grateful for them to take me on and really bring this systems thinking approach um, to starting our campus lab efforts. And of course, Caroline, as you know, became basically spearheaded the implementation of the program after I left, and it was incredible. And so I'm very grateful to Caroline, because if it weren't for Caroline, I may not have completed the project that I'm going to talk about today. So today's talk is actually the title of the paper that Caroline and I published together, titled "Campuses as Living Labs for Sustainability Problem Solving: Trends, Triumphs, and Traps." Let's see. And of course, so I wanted to, of course, give Caroline uh, a shout out here, because we published this in the Journal of Environmental Studies and Sciences under the Environmental Education section, and we're really excited to get that out there. And this is the first talk that I will be giving regarding this specific paper since then. So talked a little bit about the fellowship that I did, and essentially what I was doing at Princeton was really reaching out to different departments, different faculty, different administrators, and saying, hey, how have you used the campus and its different dimensions for sustainability, problem solving, for learning, for engagement? And so a lot of the time, I spent a lot of the time in meetings and really having these discussions. And it was really interesting because although now we're formalizing this term, campus as lab, and in the concept, um, campuses, or at least in my experience at Princeton, the campus has been used as a living laboratory for a very long time. But the exciting part about the work that we were doing was really kind of identifying more opportunities, many more opportunities for engagement. And that was really exciting. The logo that you see here in the middle of the image was actually developed by one of our interns that year. And it is an image of Princeton University's Nassau Hall, our main administrative building, and we really try to incorporate different aspects of the built environment, engagement, operations, so really an education. So I really liked the logo. It was really exciting to really present that logo to our community at Princeton, because it really was the start of something exciting. So I'm very grateful to them and to our interns who helped develop that logo. Let's see. So, okay, so Canvas's lab. Some of the most important outcomes of using the campus as a lab for sustainability problem solving include the connections that are made visible to students and the campus community between theory and practice, and then the connections that we can see between the university campus and the world. So it's really an attempt to find local solutions, and then hopefully later have some lessons learned that we can apply at the global level. And that's the one of the main goals, I would say, of campus as lab. But of course, it takes a lot of effort, a lot of energy, and a lot of like really bridging, the theory and the practice, bridging the operations, the academics, It's a lot of work, but there's some great outcomes. Other great outcomes include capacity and attitude development of the campus community, and also operational and reputational benefits for the institution. And of course, policy relevant reports, project results that we can hopefully learn from and then scale up. Applied sustainability problem solving, especially initiatives that involve these collaborations between students, faculty, and staff, um, are really increasingly gaining attention throughout institutions of higher education. And of course, that's exemplified by this community of practice that we have right now, and it's really exciting. But when we started this project, we were thinking, well, to what extent are campuses using their campuses as living laboratories? Do we know of the trends? Is it increasing? Is it decreasing? Where is it where are the focal areas of campus as lab? And that was really what allowed me to go in and say, okay, I want to find out what is going on out there across the US and Canada and other institutions, across different institutions, and what can we learn? So as of 2019, nearly 1,000 institutions of higher education in North America and beyond were publicly sharing their sustainability performance data via ASHI's STARS system. And this is the STARS, the Sustainability Tracking Assessment and Rating System tool. And as many of you know, institutions that choose to self-report under STARS are awarded points under broad categories of academics, engagement, operations, planning and administration, as well as innovation and leadership initiatives. And then you have more specific performance indicators and criteria under each broad category. Institutions then earn designations ranging from STARS Bronze to STARS Platinum. And this is important because, as was indicated in a Princeton Review College Hopes and Worries survey back in 2018, about 63% of parents and teens indicated that having information about a campus's commitment to sustainability would influence their decision to attend or apply to that school. So, as this STARS framework is so widely used, a high STAR scores can have significant implications for an institution's reputation, enrollment, and potentially their financial bottom line. So STARS was launched in 2008 as a pilot version, but then in 2014, STARS 2.0 was released for the first time included this campus as lab category. And to earn points under the campus as lab credit, institutions must utilize the campus infrastructure and operations for multidisciplinary student learning and applied research that contributes to understanding campus sustainability challenges or advancing sustainability on campus. And this can include different types of work, including class projects, thesis projects, term papers, published papers, that essentially involves active and experiential learning, and that really brings together operations and academics. And of course, campuses wishing to report can refer to the STARS technical manual, which includes examples of acceptable reportable activities that would fall under campus's lab, right, according to this system. And then finally, campuses can earn up to 4 points towards their STARS ratings by reporting campus as lab activity. So it's really exciting that we have this tool where we can just go in and self-report and really look at what other institutions are doing. And so I mentioned the STARS technical manual, and they have examples of the different types of activities that can be reported, as I mentioned. So for example, in dining services, one example would be, as a class project, students developed a business plan for a student governed cooperative, right? And so they develop a business plan, they're working with campus dining, and then they have a report. There is an outcome. So that's just one example. STARS 2.0 does recognize campus as lab efforts for on-campus internships and non-credit work, as long as the work has a learning component. But things like co-curricular activities, community-based work, immersive education programs won't really count as campus as lab efforts, because they're accredited under a different section. Okay. And that's section AC5, which is immersive experiences. So there is a interesting, I wouldn't say fine line, but you have to read closely to really say where does this go, and that's fine, right? They're reporting, but there's many different sections that you can report under stars. That may not necessarily be classified as campus as lab. So our goal was to use stars data that was publicly available to really understand to what extent campus as lab efforts were concentrated in different administrative and operational areas. Okay, and I'll go into more detail what I mean by those different areas. And we focused across on institutions of higher education in the U.S. and Canada, and that was mostly because of the data that was available to look at trends. And so through analyzing the differences in self-reported data for different categories, like I said, I'll get into that. We identified different changes in campus as lab efforts across 2016 and 2018. And again, thank you to Caroline for really pushing me to work on this, because at one point I only had a data set for 2016 of what was happening, like a snapshot of what was happening. But then when Caroline reached out, she that really motivated me to go in and collect the data for 2018, so we could really compare what happened between 2016 and 2018. And again, that's because of the available data those 2 years, and it was exciting because we did see some interesting trends. So what we did is we used the stars data portal to download spreadsheets of all the stars institutions that reported information under the campus as living laboratory category. We filtered for all institutions, and then we decided to focus on US and Canada, like I said, and that was because of the availability of the data. Though there are different countries, institutions in different countries reporting too, right? So the campus as lab credit in the STARS tool allows institutions to self-report under 14 different categories, okay? Um, so there's 14 categories outlined by STARS, and then there's an other category. So for the purpose of this study, we consider the 14 categories to be either operational or administrative. The operational categories were more directly linked to the built environment. And so that included grounds, air and climate, dining, etc. And then the administrative categories were a bit more socially explicit, okay? And I'll show you the trends in those categories when we get to the results section. So what we did is for each institution that reported, this is an example of the page under the campuses lab credit. So this is Princeton University. So what you see here is, for example, the first question that I'm pointing with my cursor here: is the institution utilizing its campus as a living lab um, in relation to air and climate? So that's air and climate is one of the categories, right? So they said yes. So what I did is I will go in and I will score yes in my database that I created from the spreadsheets I downloaded from the system. And I did that for all 14 categories and the other category. And I just want to share that scoring a category as yes or no, it's only an indicator that campus lab work was conducted in that area, and it does not measure the extent of the work performed. So it doesn't really tell me. You can see the description. There's a description of what happened in air and climate, and that description can include one project or 10 projects. So it doesn't really tell me whether more than one project was conducted in any given area. Okay, it just tells me that some work was done in that category. What we also did is we surveyed this other category to see what people were reporting under other. Okay, there were already 14 categories. What are people putting under other? So I surveyed that category for each institution and then further subdivided that category to better understand the self-reporting. Um, and I did that through a process of iterative exploration. So going and looking at emerging themes and revisiting over and over until there were clear themes emerging. There was also I also kept track of anything that could be classified as over-reporting in that other category, meaning according to the STARS technical manual, according to their criteria, could this information have clearly fit under any of the original categories? So I was interested in seeing that. What are we reporting? Is it overreported? Why are people placing information in that category? So this is the exciting part. So these are the results. I'm going to break this down for you. So in blue, you're going to see the data for 2016, and in orange for 2018. So this is percent of institutions for both years reporting campus as lab data under each of the categories. We have 14 categories. So starting from the left in air and climate all the way to water, this is what we consider more operational categories. And then from coordination and planning to public engagement, those were more administrative. And of course, we have the other category. So to give you some context regarding numbers, so this is percentages, right? But for 2016, we had 171 institutions reporting. And then for 2018, we have 347 institutions. So between the 2 years, we saw about a 200% increase in institutions reporting campus as lab. And that was really, really exciting because it just tells you something. It tells you people are reporting, they have the ability to report, they have somewhere to report to, and the number increased drastically over 2 years. So about a 200% increase in the number of institutions reporting between 2016 and 2018. So the figure shows the proportions of the reporting institutions conducting campus lab work in each of these categories, right? And so what's interesting is that the average number of categories, there's 14 categories plus the other, so that's 15 categories, but there was an average of about 10 categories reported across the 2 years for all institutions. Most institutions appear to focus their campus as lab efforts in the operational categories that I mentioned, from air and climate, all the way to water. So there's more of a focus there. And that's not really surprising, right? Because that's what we associate mostly with sustainability, but also what is feasible. Across both years, 6 of these 9 operational categories contain reports from more than 80% of institution reporting. So by that, I mean, if you look at buildings, energy, dining services and grounds, and then waste and water, more than 80% of the institutions are reporting in those categories. So it's really heavily concentrated there. But again, maybe not too surprising, right? Because it's easier to develop a program where I can team up with the grounds team to study the ecology or impact of grounds or a garden than it is potentially to go and really assess, what do we mean by diversity and affordability or public engagement? And we can discuss that further. Purchasing was the only category that we didn't see as much, still a very high number. If you see in 2018, 47% of institutions reported some campus lab activity under purchasing, which is really interesting because even when I was working at the university and trying to figure out who do I talk to, purchasing, okay, how do we engage in this sustainability conversation? It's very clear that it's one of those areas that would be very difficult to connect students to, just because of the campus culture and where are the purchasing administrators located, where is the team, etc. So that's very interesting right there. And of course, fewer institutions were reporting campus as lab activities in the administrative categories, okay, again, from coordination and planning all the way to public engagement. Overall, the largest increase in campus as lab activities was seen in the diversity and affordability category. And I mean increase across 2 years. So we see 36% in 1 year and then 50% of institutions reporting under diversity and affordability in 2018. So that saw the biggest jump, which again, also very interesting and very exciting. And it is very difficult to interpret this because we're looking at general trends. Okay, so that was what we were interesting. So we get a snapshot of what happened. And as you all know, campus cultures are different. Campuses are dynamic. They're changing, and this concept of campus as lab is very different we can conceptualize it differently, right? So this is why we have these conversations. So like, what do we mean by campuses lab, and what does it mean to Aishi and to stars, you know? So very, very interesting. So this is our major takeaways. Now I want to focus a little bit more into that other category. 44% of the institutions reported campuses lab work in the other category in 2016, and about 48% reported campuses lab work in the other category in 2018. So those are large numbers, 40%, 44%, 48%. So this table shows the various topic areas identified in this other category and the number and proportion of institutions that reported campus lab activities under each of these subcategories. And again, these are categories that I narrowed down using this analysis of iterative exploration over and over until I saw the emerging themes. The numbers in parentheses include the proportions, and then the numbers outside parentheses are the counts. So a significant amount of the reported information in this category was actually reported as, I put over-reporting. And that means that, for example, in 2016, 30% of institutions placing information in this other category could have placed that information under any of the original categories set by stars. And then we see that in 2018, 46% of institutions putting information in this other category could have placed that information in an explicit category set by stars. So that was interesting there, and not necessarily an issue, but it does tell you that people are looking for somewhere to place information for one reason or another, and that could be because of misinterpretation, or because they said, oh, okay, I remember the project, or here's some more space for me to place information. In 2016, most efforts that were not categorized as explicitly overreported were in the areas of biodiversity, conservation, and ecology, culture and behavior change, and then we saw some in visual and performing arts. But in 2018, we did see a little bit of a shift in these rankings, and a lot of the work in these subcategories was concentrated in visual and performing arts. So that was about 30% of the work placed in this other category was visual and performing arts. And then we saw a lot of work in curriculum development, and then also biodiversity, conservation, and ecology. So it's very interesting to know, why was the information placed here? Did self-reporters feel that they couldn't place their activity, their vision performing arts activity, in a different category, their biodiversity, conservation, and ecology category, data in a different category? So it really opens, it's more to open up this conversation of why are people placing that information here, but also it's exciting because we can consider these as nascent campuses lab areas. Biodiversity, conservation, and ecology. That in itself, we talk about conservation and ecology, and a lot of times it's difficult to bring that into the sustainability conversation, because one thing is to discuss grounds operations, and then one thing is to discuss a project on the ecology and behavior of a certain insect and say that's just purely natural science. How do we bring that into something more applied? So that could be it too, tensions there. But it is exciting to see increases and reporting in visual and performing arts and curriculum. So overall, this 203% increase in the number of institutions reporting campuses lab activities from 2016 to 2018 suggests that this general concept of the campus as a living lab is emerging and growing as a priority sustainability focus area. And that this community of practice is also testament to that. Despite this growing trend, our results reveal that STARS 2.0, the tool, may not properly incentivize reporting on the full extent of activities conducted at these institutions, which could result in either over-reporting or under-reporting, right? So if I go in and I write, okay, one campus lab project under air and climate, I'm gonna get the credit. I put something down, but it's just one project. Whereas some institutions, they write a whole list of many projects, right? And that could be because maybe not many projects are going on. Maybe they're not aware of the different projects that are going on. Maybe the campuses lab program has not been fully established. But there are opportunities to to better report or to better capture what's going on at different institutions. And that would only benefit everyone, right? From the institution itself to the community of practice, to different campus lab administrators who want to see what's going on in different institutions and learn from them. When institutions self-report campus lab engagement under each of these given categories, the 14 categories plus the other category, there really is no metric that measures the extent to which campus lab efforts are concentrated in each category, right? So as I mentioned, uh, I I can report under air and climate, I can report one activity. It doesn't really tell me if I'm reporting one activity or 10 activities, I'm still going to get that credit. So it doesn't really measure the extent of what is really happening. It just gives us an idea of some of the projects. So as I mentioned, scoring a category in my analysis was only an indicator that campus's lab work was conducted in that given area and doesn't measure the extent of the work performed, right? Whether more than one project was actually conducted. So it would be interesting to see something like a metric that really gives weight to each category according to the number of projects reported. And that would be valuable for analyzing trends, looking at data. Again, not necessary. I'm not critiquing this as a flaw, but seeing more of an opportunity to look at trends because clearly Campus Lab is growing. The campus of as lab categories predetermined by stars, they do provide a snapshot of how institutions of higher education and environmental administrators define and interpret both sustainability and this concept of using the campus as a laboratory. Despite the differences in reporting or potential misreporting or underreporting, it is noteworthy that STARS also focuses on very socially explicit categories such as coordination, planning, and governance, diversity and affordability, health and well-being, investment and finance. So this may provide the opportunity and incentive for administrators and students to explore new types of projects and gain a greater campus as lab score under stars. By seeing those categories, it does open that conversation to saying, oh, are we doing campus as lab projects in the areas of investment and finance? Are we doing campuses lab? Are we seeing them in diversity and affordability? It does provide an incentive for administrators to go in and look at opportunities that they can engage with. Also, it's also notable that there has been an increase in reporting under the diversity and affordability category, as we saw a 14% increase. That was the highest increase we saw between 2016 and 2018. But for reporting purposes, it would be productive to engage in discussions of what we mean by diversity and affordability in the context of campuses lab. And for the institutions reporting campuses lab in the other category, as I mentioned, there was a high number in 2016, 30%, in 2018, 46% of institutions that could have reported that information under any of the 14 categories. And there's potential reasons for reporting this campus lab work in the other category, which could include uncertainties as to how to classify campus lab activities according to these original categories set by stars, the need to highlight specific activities. Maybe I felt, oh, this was a really exciting project. Let me just put it under other so it really stands out, either because of its novelty or the cross-disciplinary nature of the work. It is really difficult. I understand it's really difficult to tease out different categories when environmental studies and sustainability as a whole is interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary. And then potential uncertainties as to whether the activities were actually warranted the title of campuses lab. So there is campus lab, it is defined in the STARS manual, but like I said, campuses are dynamic, are different, and we all may have different and emerging concepts of what we mean by campus as lab. What was interesting is that There are, like I mentioned, some nascent campus as lab priority areas in the other category, like culture and behavior change, visual and performing arts, and ecology, biodiversity, and conservation. So to summarize, we looked at some trends. We saw an interesting increase in institutions reporting campus as lab work between 2016 and 2018. We saw some interesting campus as lab priority areas that were emerging. STARS is effective and extremely important for highlighting the role of campus lab in higher education. It also has been effective in really setting out these socially explicit categories and looking at the increases in self-reporting. In terms of traps, there is misreporting of campus lab activities, but this really provides an opportunity to analyze, potentially modify these campus lab categories to reflect the changing role that sustainability and campus lab play on university campuses in the US and Canada and beyond. So thank you so much. That's essentially the presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Christian, thank you so much. This was excellent. I imagine there will be a number of questions and opportunities for discussion. So at this point, I'd like to invite folks if they want to turn on their cameras. And we can use, a combination of the chat function. Maybe that can be the primary way, or folks are fine to unmute themselves and ask away. And then maybe as needed, Christian, we might ask you to share your slides again in case somebody has a question about a particular chart or something that you shared, but let's give it a try. Yeah, there we go. That's perfect. Give it a try this way. Does anybody want to kick it off with a question?
Hi, Emily. This is Steve Miller with Strategic Energy Innovations. How are you?
Hey, Steve.
I just want to make sure you can hear me. Christian, thank you so much for that presentation. Really, really insightful and helpful for me. You had mentioned something at one point about the potential for getting credits for student experiences in one category versus another, one being more immersive kind of learning experiences versus, and I didn't quite catch the distinction under ASHE STARS reporting. So could you maybe go over that one more time for me?
Yeah, of course. 1 second. So essentially, so essentially, work such as on-campus internships and certain non-credit work that would be classified as immersive education programs. So for example, immersive education programs would include like co-curricular activities, community-based work. So yes, I am doing community-based work where maybe I'm using the campus as a laboratory by let's see, contributing to managing a garden and I'm bringing in the community. So I am doing something, I'm essentially using the campus as a laboratory because I'm bringing people, we're working the garden, we're trying to find more sustainable management of this garden, but that doesn't really have an explicit learning component, and it doesn't necessarily produce a report or something that we can learn from. Okay, what was the lesson learned? And then how can we apply this to a different system or scale up? So those types of work, it is a fine line, but according to the manual, that type of work, that community-based work, that co-curricular, where you can argue, say, this is the campus, it's a laboratory and I'm using it, but there's not an explicit learning component. That would be accredited under a different section. And that section is called immersive experience in the STARS system. So it's not an explicit learning component or an explicit outcome. Yeah.
Thank you, that's helpful. Okay. Yeah.
I can chime in with a question. Thanks, Christian, for the presentation and for sharing your research with us. Thinking about your comments around the types of projects people can report under the different categories, you know, and the difference between, let's say, an in-class assignment that uses a campus's lab versus a PhD research project.
Mhm.
Do you have any recommendations for STARS as to how to recognize the almost the intensity or the amount of effort applied to those different projects? Because to me, it strikes me right now they're compared in the same way, or they're scored the same way, even though they're quite different.
That's a great question. That is a great question. Everything is scored in the same way, whether it was a small project that I did, in the course of a week, or whether it was a thesis that took me 2 years. You're right, it is scored in the same way. It is difficult. So, we thought what could be beneficial for STARS, for the system, and we didn't get into too much detail with it, but essentially a weighted score, where a system where you weighted how many in this category, say grounds, how many projects. Okay, you weigh the score according to the number of projects. You can describe what the project was. You can say this was a thesis and it took me 2 years, it took me 3 years, 4 years. I would say it would take it would be a complete modification of the system for a weighted score. I mean, if you incorporate time, length of the project, how do you weight that? Number of people involved, then that's another thing to weigh. So it would take a formula that could definitely be done in the system. We just input, for this project, how many people were involved, for how long, what type of project was it? Was it a master's thesis, a dissertation? How many different administrative and operational units were there involved? Was it an effort of dining plus grounds plus faculty? So it really gets complex, because these are dynamic projects. But I would recommend a weighted system. Now, what's difficult with that is that for the self-reporters, right now it's very user friendly. You go in, you say, yes, I did something, and I have time, I'll type in some of the project that we did. But if I have 30 projects under dining services because Campus's Lab has launched and it's been great, sitting down to report so much data for each project would be difficult, I think. But I'm sure there can be a balance for a weighted system online. So these are conversations that we can have. Like I said, this was just providing the snapshot, but these are things that we can think about for better reporting.
Absolutely, thank you. I think there's a comment from Molly in the chat box. Let me just pull it up here. Molly says, I'd imagine under those types of more complex scoring systems, the community colleges would need to be scored differently, as they can't commit to thesis or major research projects. That's a wonderful point. Yeah. Do you want to add anything onto that, Christian?
No, that is a great point. That is a great point. Institutions are different. Institutions have different, they're different in terms of administration. That's another interesting thing, because right now we're comparing all institutions as if they were exactly the same. So I think adding if we added a weighted system that also considers student population size of the university campus, that in itself makes a big difference. If I have a campus that has a lot of people and it's really research inclined, and obviously we're going to see a bias there. So maybe considering those things like population size, income, endowment. Endowment could be more fair given the differences in campuses, but it's my opinion.
Great.
Hi, Christian.
Go ahead, Gina.
Yeah, greetings from Princeton. Glad to see you're doing well and that you continue this work since you moved on. So thanks for the presentation. And to your last comment, I helped contribute to Princeton's 2018 report, and now I'm helping with the 2021 report. And I can attest to just how much work it is to document Campus's Lab projects. So I guess I've always come to it as the point of just putting down one project. And I guess I wanted to get your thoughts, or anyone else's thoughts on if you had challenges or successes in trying to just document and track projects as they happen. Sometimes, students in classes are pursuing campus as lab work, but we don't even know. So that's one thing. And then my last question was, have you approached ASHE at all with some of your findings and recommendations? And have they said anything about reporting changes?
Well, it's so great. It's so great to hear that. Yeah, that you're working there. It is challenging, right? So one thing that I mentioned was when I was there working at the Office of Sustainability, what I was trying to do is like sit down and have a meeting with different administrators, so different managers, lab managers, department heads, etc. To really get the word out that campus as lab is a concept, and it brings really exciting opportunities to really have faculty engage with staff and students. And so I think that's the first part. You have to let people know that this is something that you want to establish on your campus, that you want to just, or maybe highlight, because people were excited. People were really excited, like, oh my goodness, yeah, we've been doing this for a while. I'm so glad to see it being formalized now. I'm excited to see the opportunities. And I know that Princeton had a fund for Campus as Lab, and obviously that in itself was an opportunity to get people involved. But I feel at that time it was very limited to our sustainability community. So I think continuing efforts to really communicate this concept and just put it out there, whether through exhibitions or newsletters, etc. And in terms of approaching ASHE, not yet. I have not, but I will. I want to write this more. Obviously, this is a technical paper that we published, so I want to really write a nice, simple, short memo saying, look, this is what we found. We want to, and I have not for personal reasons. I'm pursuing my PhD right now. It's been a crazy year. But I definitely want to. I know they had their conference recently, and there's a lot of opportunities, but I definitely will. This one on my list to write a memo and share the results with them.
I can just add in a thought, Gina, to share on reporting. Something that we do with our campuses lab projects to reduce the burden of reporting on staff is to have one of the outcomes of each project be a case study, which sounds like bigger than it is. It's simply 3 paragraphs. What was the summary of the challenge, what work was done, and what next steps would be taken. And they're posted on our website, so it serves multiple purposes, documenting it, doing communications, and then also providing a springboard for other students to look at and say, oh, this student did this project, and here's what they say are next questions that I could build upon with my research. So that's one thing we've done.
I have a question, Christian. So it sounds like you mentioned your approach of iterative exploration to identify emergent themes with projects that were listed under the other category. And I'm curious, I imagine that kind of qualitative analysis you need a methodology in order to get it done, because it can be quite large. So perhaps this wasn't quite relevant to your approach, or maybe it was, but I'm just curious if, in addition to the categories that you developed as these themes or topics of the projects, if you observed any other trends or similarities that, like, oh, it seems like a lot of campuses are not just doing a visual arts project, but even within visual arts specifically, they're doing a project on this particular topic. Maybe that is like a layer of detail further than what you were using, but I'm just curious if you had noticed any trends like that.
Yeah, no, for sure. Like I mentioned, some universities reported just a line or two under some categories, and others reported paragraphs. And so, but something that did catch my eye, which was super interesting, I went through each institution. It was like 300 something institutions by 2018, like each one reading every single thing, marking. And one interesting thing that I saw emerging as a project, like a specific project that people kept reporting, was sustainable clothing and fashion using waste and recycling to use it as clothing for a lot of shows. For some reason that kept coming up. I was like, this is very interesting. And that was being reported a lot in other, because if you think about it, it's, you say, okay, do I put this under community engagement if I have like a fashion show or a display? Do I put this under waste because you're recycling? Where does this go? So that was actually very, very interesting. And another thing was not too specific, but curriculum development. You saw some universities saying, I am actively going to put campus lab projects as part of my curriculum. Like I'll have my students do a campus lab project. And so that was emerging too, different projects like that, but our general statements that said that was going to be included in the curriculum. Yeah, but the sustainable fashion as a specific project came up multiple times. Very, very interesting. Yeah.
Amy, I just wanted to give you a chance to speak to your comment about or question about behavior change. If you're able to unmute yourself, please go ahead and do so.
Yes, I can. And thank you very much. Sitting on the STARS committee and looking at how we advance the technical guidance in the future, we always stop and ask our question, how are we using the data? What is the data intended to accomplish? Not just adding a bunch of data collection in there at the expense of the people trying to collect it, but that there's a distinct purpose behind it. So what I was looking at the presentation was excellent, Christian. I really appreciate it and have loved the in-depth analysis of this particular category. But what I'm thinking is, while it would be nice to be weighted, does that discourage more people from applying or participating? And it becomes cumbersome to get the data, particularly in large universities like mine, where we don't have a system in place that collects it. So the advantage, or what is it saying if you have 15 in one category versus one solid one in a category? Are you trying to have campus as a living lab? Or are you trying to evaluate how many they have? What is the purpose behind going with weighted categories, other than it tells you some information, but it has to be a real meaning behind the data in order to justify the resources it takes to get.
That's an excellent point. Yeah, and I definitely thought about it when I reflected on this, because in a way, well, for me, this was one, I was trying to understand what was happening, right? I was starting campus lab as a job, but two, it was an academic exercise because I'm very academically inclined, and so, like you mentioned, we can go in depth into like this other category, but really, why do we need to? And that's a great question. Do we need to really go in depth? So I would say that it is exciting to do an analysis like this because like we saw some interesting trends, but I completely agree that we do have to justify where how our resources are going to be allocated. I completely agree with that. Yeah. Thank you.
One thing that, I mean, there's so many of your takeaways, Christian, I think provide some food for thought for our community of practice in terms of opportunities to engage together around different topics, whether that's just the mechanics of reporting our campuses lab activities and STARS, or for example, looking at some of the categories that you identified as being the least represented, like purchasing, investment and finance, and thinking through as a community what it means that there aren't as many campuses lab projects on those topics. And just because ASHE has them as a category, of course, doesn't necessarily mean that we all need to be doing projects on those topics, but maybe it's because they're particularly challenging and they would be really valuable, and we can work together to figure out how to design and encourage projects on those topics on our campuses. So that's one thing I'm really excited about, taking a look at your findings and thinking about how we can use the collective energy of this community to maybe address, not necessarily thinking about how to change the reporting, but just how do we facilitate folks being able to take on the breadth of potential topics on their campuses. So I'm just excited for that. Just wanted to.
No, that's yeah, and that's something we mentioned and kind of said, look, this is great, because just looking at like I said, the graph, it's just saying, huh, this is what we see the trends, but what are we doing? And can we do something with purchasing? Can we do something with diversity and affordability? And it's just like a moment of reflection. Yeah. Which is exciting to see. There could be things, there could be people we can reach out to, there could be projects, opportunities. And yeah, completely agree.
Well, we have just a couple more minutes before the end, so maybe time for one more question if somebody wants to chime in. Maybe we'll wrap it up here then. So Christian, again, thank you so much. This has been, super informative, great foundation for discussion for this group. For everybody attending, we'll be posting the recording, and Christian, just so you know, as Rochelle had mentioned, we'll be posting the recording in our shared drive and getting it out to the rest of the members of our listserv, which is about up to 200 folks at this point. And Christian, if there are any questions that come up afterwards, could we share those with you?
Yeah, please share my email. I'm happy to write back and answer any questions. And I don't know if you have a copy of the paper maybe already, but I can also send a PDF or a link.
Oh, great. Yeah,
So
that would be,
yeah.
that'd be excellent. Yeah,
Mhm.
Wonderful.
Just one last question. If people need to leave the call, please feel free to go ahead and do so. But there was one last question that came in about asking for information on the clothing and landfill for students working on their capstone. So do you recall which organization or which institution it was, Christian?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
It's for the students who worked on the waste clothing project.
Oh, okay. Yeah. There were multiple institutions, so I don't remember specifically. There were multiple. It was something that was like I was seeing over and over again with multiple institutions. But I'm happy to if you send me an email, I'm happy to list a couple that were doing these projects. Mm-hmm.
Okay, fabulous. Thank you so much, and lovely to see you all on the call. And take care. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much.